True UFO Encounters horror stories. They're here. There's no denying it anymore. I would have had a hard time believing before. I've always been more a hard-proof sort of person. But with the Congress hearings, the mummified corpses shown in Mexico, and now this, what more proof do I need? How much longer am I going to keep trying to bury my head in the sand, instead of facing the truth? It all started a few months ago, as I began hearing these strange noises at night. I live in New Mexico, been here my whole life, taking care of the family's ranch. I was born here, and I always thought I'd spend the rest of my days here as well. Life was just normal as usual. Since I wake up early to begin taking care of my daily tasks, I'm usually already in bed by 9, watching a bit of TV before going to sleep, and I find myself drifting off at about 10. Not this time, though. They were running this movie just by the time I turned on the TV, and I got too into it. When it was done, it was about 11 already. I wanted to still get enough sleep before waking up the next day, so I hurried to turn it off and close my eyes. It was no use. For some reason, the sleep just wasn't coming that night. I'm not a person who suffers from insomnia, and even though at my age, some folk often find themselves taking sleeping pills or something, I was never one of those. I guess that's why it was so clear to me that something wasn't right. I turned and drifted in bed, trying to find a good position, but it just wasn't working. As I stared out the window, it struck me. The night sky was clear, like abnormally clear. What I mean is, I'd never in my entire life on this ranch had seen such a clear, lit night sky. I don't mean like it was daylight or something. It was clearly the middle of the night. I still needed to turn the lights on to see anything proper, but it was just bright, like how it looks when the sun's about to set and the day's very cloudy. Strange. I didn't do anything about it at first. What is there to do about an abnormally bright night sky, besides closing your blinds and trying to ignore it? As I got off the bed to do exactly that, I heard them. The noises. They were these deep, buzzing, metallic sounds that made my entire body feel like it was slightly rattling. Now that was more unusual. I had a ranch to take care of. I couldn't have anyone moving heavy machinery around my sheep or my crops, so I had to go down and try to find out what the hell was going on. I slowly went downstairs, grabbed my rifle, and walked outside, ready to fend off any strangers from my property. It was just amazing how bright the entire night was. I barely had any trouble distinguishing the sheep's silhouettes a few feet away from the house, and I could see my truck reflecting the light directly at an angle. It felt off, completely off. Never seen anything like it before. I walked forward, wary and increasingly nervous with each step, but I didn't see anything. Suddenly, the noises were back. The buzzing. I looked around everywhere. It made no damn sense. That deep, booming metallic vibrations. A noise like that could only come from something huge. But the night was empty. It was empty, until it wasn't. In the blink of an eye, somehow, the sky turned into metal. Like 1 minute there was nothing, then suddenly my entire ranch was covered by this huge, shiny, metallic plate. Startled, I stumbled and landed on my back, and could nothing but stare, stunned, mouth open, completely incapable of processing what was unfolding right before my eyes. Then I began running. I don't know what for. My brain was in a complete panic, and the only response it managed to get out of me was to make me run. I kept on going further and further away from my home, but the sky was still covered in metal. I didn't know what to think. I just kept on going until my legs gave up on me. Completely out of breath, I collapsed on the grassy field and closed my eyes, defeated. That didn't last long, though. I couldn't just try and look away. I opened them again and let out a sigh of relief. The night sky greeted me again. The relief quickly turned into more dread when I saw the metal plate was still there. I'd just reached its end. It curved upward and out of sight. forming what must have been a half a mile long, God knows how tall flying metal machine. I don't want to say ship. I don't want to saw flying saucer. I'm not one of those crazy farmers talking about UFOs on those stupid conspiracy shows. But it was this enormous thing hovering right above me ranch, covering almost all of it. Its booming, metallic buzzing made its appearance once again, and that confirmed it. They'd been up there this whole time. I just couldn't see them. My rifle still in my shaking hands, I couldn't think of anything better than aim and fire. It didn't make any difference at all. I kneeled and cried out, asking what they wanted of me, but I got no response. Something caught my eye. Instead, these strange, glowing beings, their ship constantly shifting as they walked straight out of my house. I stood there, baffled. They seemed to make a sign, and a ray of light came over them straight from the flying machine. And they were gone. A second later, the machine disappeared, and the night was no longer bright. They were in my house. I don't know for how long. I don't know if they were watching me, or they stole something from me. I just know that they're here, and they want something. They're among us, and whatever they may want from us, it seems like one they've any say in the matter. I moved to my first very own apartment about 4 months ago. I struggled to find a proper job after college for a while, but eventually, somehow, I landed on a very good position as a part of the HR team on this pretty respectable company. And I found myself with a better salary than what I expected to earn with 5 more years of experience. This meant that in just 3 months at my new job, I found myself with enough money to pay a deposit on a big one-person apartment and finally leave my shitty roommates behind. Not only that, but the apartment is just a 10-minute walk away from my office, and the apartment next to mine. The 11B was still completely vacant. I had the entire floor for myself. I was over the moon. There was just one small issue. There were these weird lights, super strong, coming in from somewhere every single night. They'd even go through my curtains, which sure, they weren't the thickest, but they were quite good with the rest of the city lights. These 2 lights, though, they'd get through every night and hit me straight in the face when I was trying to sleep. I tried to figure out where they were coming from. I'd open the window and try to find out their source, but whenever they'd flash, I'd have to close my eyes to avoid getting blinded, and when I opened them again, they were gone. I considered on going and buying some thicker curtains, but eventually I learned to just sleep on my belly so when they'd come, they wouldn't hit my eyes anymore. I never noticed when they stopped. I just know Fatby when the new neighbor moved in, they were gone. After around 3 months, Mr. Walters moved into the 11BI, never saw him move in, just saw the name in the panel outside the building. He made sure I'd know he was there though. That day as I was eating dinner, these loud as fuck TV noises made me jump from my seat. They were coming through the wall from the next apartment. I was pissed. Even with an entire wall between us, the volume was so loud that I could see my glass shaking. I knocked on the wall, so had know I could hear him, but it was no use. Deeply annoyed, I went out, and avoiding the weird row of what must have been 6 pairs of the exact same, immaculate white sneakers, I knocked on the door. Nothing. I rang the bell. No answer either. I rang 2, 3, 4 times. I even tried shouting, but no one came to open, and eventually I just gave up. I went back into my place, trying to find the number of the building's administrator on my phone, but all of a sudden, as soon as the clock hit 10 p.m., the noise stopped. Relieved, I decided not to complain about my neighbor on his first day here, and decided to just go to bed instead. I was willing to put up with it. Just a bad first impression, I thought. That is, until a week passed by. The same exact routine happened every single day. Every day the TV would be turned on at the loudest volume at 9 p.m. and would go off at 10. Like a fucking clock. I did try to complain eventually, but the only thing the administrator told me is that Mr. Walters was a very busy man, that he'd try to reach him but wasn't sure when he'd be able to. The worst part is, that wasn't even the strangest thing about him. He never left the apartment. I swear to God, I don't know how many times I rung that bell to tell him to turn the TV volume down, and he never opened. The weekends, I even made sure go out of my place several times a day to try and run into him, but I never did. He never did groceries, never had anyone over, nothing. Plus, his 6 pair of white shoes stayed as clean and new as the day I first saw them. I was sure no one was wearing them. I started to get a really bad feeling about him. All this behavior, it just struck me as so off. Things turned for the worst after the smell. A few days ago, as I got back from work, I noticed this strong, unbearable stench starting coming out from his apartment and invading the whole corridor. It was gag-inducing, and I went to pound on his door, try to get him to explain himself, but unsurprisingly no one answered. Holding my breath, I put my ear to the door, just to try and find out if he was even in there at all. The only thing I could hear were these bone-chilling, screeching and clicking noises right outside the door. They were insect-like, is my best description. Nothing like I'd ever heard before. I ran back into my apartment and slammed the door behind me, breathing heavily. I didn't go for the administrator this time. I straight up called the cops. Unsurprisingly, they were useless. They came and smelled the goddamn stench, and they tried ringing the doorbell. They tried knocking. Of course, they got no answer and they refused to go in, saying they needed a warrant for doing so, and that my best bet was to contact the administrator. Then, they just left. Frustrated, I just locked my door, barricaded it, and tried to get some sleep to try to clear my head. I woke up with the lights blinding my eyes again. I shielded me face and was just about to turn on my belly again when I heard them. Some noises in the apartment, right outside my window. My whole body tensed up. I tried to stay in bed, to bury my head under the covers and ignore them, but curiosity got the best of me. I approached slowly, trying to stay out of sight, and peeked my head from the edge. I saw Mr. Walters for the first time. A humanoid figure, its head just too big to look normal, its limbs just too long to look correct, its torso just too thin, walking out of his window and stepping into thin air, heading towards whatever was the source of the blinding light. Completely stunned, I saw as he reached the light, and I slowly couldn't make out his shape anymore. Just in the last moment, though, he turned, and with his eyes, too big and too black to be human, looked straight at me. He then vanished into the light, and the light was off. I don't know what he is, but he's not from this world. Of that, I'm sure. The stench is gone, as are the noises. I'm scared about him ever coming back. He knows I saw him. I think I have to look for a new apartment. I hope that'll make it hard for him to find me. It's no come to see some weird things when you're out camping. Remote places, they do that to you. No people for miles on end. Prominent darkness, the silence. It all ends up making your mind wander. I guess that's why campfire stories are so popular. The thing is, though, there's usually an explanation for the things you see. The terrifying shape of a creature stalking the night ends up being just a shadow your flashlight is casting when going through some tree's twisted branches. The bone-chilling wailings of a restless soul are most oftentimes just a fox. Foxes make some weird noises. This time, I've got nothing. What we've seen it's not from Earth. It can't be. I went on one of my bi-monthly camping trips with my boyfriend a few weeks ago. We decided this time to go to one of our favorite spots, the White Mountains National Forest. We both weren't feeling like doing a lot of traveling this time, so going for a spot that's not far away from home seemed like the best choice. Plus, the place is simply spectacular, especially around this season, when the forest becomes all shades of red, yellow, and brown, mixed with the stark contrast of the evergreen trees. We got there in about an hour and a half's drive and headed straight to the campgrounds to set up our things. Unfortunately, we realized that it really seemed like everyone else in the state had had the same exact day. The campgrounds were filled with tents, fireplaces, picnics, and families of all shapes and sizes. We usually go camping to avoid exactly this sort of thing. Therefore, the best option was just to keep on walking further and look for more solitude in another spot, deeper into the wilderness. Eventually, we found exactly what we were looking for, a small spot hidden a little bit outside of the campgrounds. Sure, we weren't technically supposed to be camping there, but it wasn't like we were far from the campgrounds, and I was sure no one would find us there anyways. Plus, the views we were getting just from outside our tent were amazing. The trees parted way to give a panoramic view to the breathtaking mountain range. As we enjoyed the scenery, I noticed something odd. There was this big round rock on the border of a nearby cliff. It was sort of dome-shaped. It really stood out, contrasted with all the other stone formations that were rugged, misshapen, and clearly weathered by the elements. This one seemed almost polished. It was a very interesting sight, but at that moment, I didn't really give it much more though beyond pointing it out to my boyfriend. Besides that, the day was entirely normal. We had a great time hiking around the forest, doing some animal sighting, and just admiring the nature. My boyfriend is an illustrator, so we spent a lot of time trying to find some good scenery for him to practice on his sketchbook with. As the sun was beginning to set, we decided to try find a higher spot to properly get the best view. We climbed up some rocks and some steep paths, and soon enough we were standing on a cliff border, looking down on the majestic landscape below us covered on the reddish rays of the sunset. We could see the weird round rock from there again, only this time it had moved. I didn't see it moving or anything, but it was somehow resting on a completely different cliff border this time. Confused, I asked my boyfriend. Maybe it'd been there all the time. Then I remembered he has basically inexistent spatial perception. The only thing he could tell me is that he wasn't really sure, and that maybe it looked like it had moved because we were looking from a different perspective. He wasn't really satisfied with that explanation. I fixed my gaze on the rock for a few more minutes. The more I looked at it, the more out of place it seemed. Its surface was so smooth, and even though it did seem to be made out of the same type of rock as its surroundings, it was just so weirdly shaped. Besides river rocks, smoothed down by the constant water flow, I'd never seen such a round formation in nature before. Eventually, I gave up on trying to figure it out, and we started to make our way back to camp. It was getting darker by the second, and we didn't want to be stuck making our way through the forest so far from our camping spot. The entire way back, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really off. I figure I'd hike up to it the next day and giveth rock a closer look. We soon were back to our tent, carrying some firewood. We got our campfire going, and after cooking, eating, and stargazing, it was getting pretty late. We decided it was time to go inside the tent and get ready for the night. We settled on watching a movie on my laptop before sleeping, and as soon as we were about to start it, we heard a beep. A loud, clean beep, like from a fire alarm or something. We both looked at each other, completely dumbfounded as to what that could have been. We were in the middle of the forest. Sure, there probably was a lot of people not far from us, but what could they've brought that would make that noise? Immediately, another beep followed, the another, right after. Suddenly, the beeping was non-stop, and we scrambled out of the tent to try to find out its source. It was right in front of us, above the cliffside and mountains, several feet in the air. The rounded rock was slowly hovering. It didn't look like a rock at all anymore. White bright lights were coming out from it as it made these loud beeping sounds. Me and my boyfriend could do nothing but watch as suddenly these huge things started to come out of it. The flying rock made its way to another cliff border, not far away from us at all, and deposited this creature onto it. We didn't get a good look. It was too dark. The flashing lights of what I can only call a ship now gave us a glimpse though insanely tall. Sickly white skin, big, pointy claws, and a head that looked way too big for its meager body. Once the creature landed on the ground, the ship disappeared in a flurry of movement. We did the only reasonable thing. We packed our stuff as fast as we could, made our way to Orkar, and drove away. We tried alerting the other campers before we left, but no one listened, and a ranger ended up kicking us out. So we left. We aren't planning on going camping anymore. If aliens have made their way to use and air hiding in remote places, better to stick to the cities. We know no one will believe us, so we were just trying to keep ourselves safe. Whatever they might want, we don't want any part in it. We will never quite manage to understand the universe. Sure, our technology keeps advancing. Every year, we take one step further. We discover another phenomenon. We make progress on our understanding of a certain concept, or we simply get better quality photos of distant planets. It'll never be enough. There are things out there that we will never comprehend. Things for which our minds weren't designed to cope with. I've worked as an astronomer for a specific country's space program for several years by now. I won't specify which country, for legal reasons, but I will just say it's own in possession of strong economic resources, and a surprising amount of them dedicated to space exploration. I just finished my PhD when they first contacted me, and was working as an academic researcher for my own university. They proposed a research project of undefined length, led by myself, and a team composed of their own personally selected experts. They wanted us to observe a newly detected celestial body near a faraway planet. I won't mention to avoid giving too many details, and try to figure its nature, trajectory, and composition. The resources for the project would be unlimited, and we were to report continuous results until they determined that the information we provided was enough. That was already sufficiently alluring for me. I'd always had big aspirations for my career, and their proposal. It was a dream come true. It was all my ambitions put together, not to mention the salary, which was more than I ever dreamed of making in my entire lifetime. There was only one catch, though. The project was to be treated with the utmost secrecy. We would not speak about our findings with anyone, not even our close relatives or romantic partners. No specific information was to ever leave the compound. That made me a bit hesitant. What could they possibly have discovered? The proposal was too alluring, however. There was just no way I would say no. A couple of months later, we were deep in research, using the latest technology to gather as much information as possible about this new celestial body. Keep in mind, this was a good while ago. That unfortunately meant that our capabilities were greatly limited. Back then, we couldn't even get a proper view of all the planets in the solar system, much less of anything that would be some hundreds of kilometers away from it. Despite how little that is in an astronomical scale, we were limited to working with what he had, which was a vague outline of the body. It was long and sort of round, kind of oval-shaped. I guess the best way to describe would be that it was shaped like a potato. We couldn't really see much more of it, but if our calculations were correct, the thing was around 800 kilometers wide. It didn't appear to be moving, and despite its closeness to a planet, it didn't seem to be majorly affected by its gravitational pull. Our first conclusion was a type of asteroid. An asteroid that had entered our solar system at some point and had ended up drifting aimlessly near that planet. We were dumbfounded as to how it had lost its momentum, though. We tried building several diagrams, calculating all possible scenarios, but we couldn't really figure out what happened. We didn't even know where it had come from. Apparently, from the extensive reports we'd received before starting the project, it had simply appeared and had been spotted by another astronomer. We didn't understand how this could be possible. We still don't. Some years went by, and things started to get even more strange. Through daily observations and data analysis, we realized that the thing was growing. Yes, we didn't know how, but there was no doubt about it. In 3 years' time, the thing seemed to have almost doubled its size. That's when the theories began. What sort of material could this asteroid be possibly made of, so that its size would be increasing with the passage of time? What were the factors contributing to it? Some of my colleagues claimed it must be made of a spongy sort of rock that had water on its insides, which due to no atmospheric pressure or gravitational pull had began to expand, expanding the entire thing along with it. That made absolutely no sense, but this was uncharted territory for all of us. Any ideas were valid. Slowly, I was beginning to understand why the government had wanted us to keep the entire project secret. This wasn't no common asteroid. Things just kept escalating from that point. Technology began improving, and we finally had a proper outline of the asteroid. It not only kept on growing, and was now around 2.5 times larger than when we first observed it, but it had started to develop into a longer, thinner shape. When we saw the outline through the telescope for the first time, my stomach fell to my feet. It looked like someone. Strangely, the thing's shape sort of resembled that of a fetus in a womb. I managed to mask my first reaction somewhat, but when my colleagues had their look, we could see how upset it made us all. We tried devising more theories. It was probably just a coincidence that it'd taken that shape. It probably just had to do with how humans look for patterns in things. In truth, though, no one was believing any of that, not even for a second. After writing the most unnerving report of my life to the government up till that point, we just received instructions to continue our research. So on we went, trying to treat the thing as just another celestial body, unwilling to address the elephant in the room for another year more. Scientists are the sort of people who can pull something like that off. Eventually, technology improved even more. Our telescopes were capable now of producing extremely quality images of even Pluto itself, and in consequence, we finally had a proper look of the thing for the first time. I'll never be able to forget it. It was a baby indeed. Some sort of immense, humanoid-looking fetus developing in no apparent womb. Its skin was gray, slimy, and sort of translucent. And I guess it'll be born anytime soon. Its face, with its elongated features and wide black empty eyes, were completely formed. The atmosphere in the research compound was grim after this discovery. I was filled with an amount of dread and despair I never though would experience in my whole life. Me and my colleagues were all dismissed from the project not long after writing that final report. We're still provided with the same salary and under constant vigilance to keep the entire thing under cover. I've commissioned someone to write my story, to try to make sense of my efforts and bring some information to the public. It's been some time by now, but I still struggle to make sense of life after such an experience. There are things out there that go far beyond us. There are so many questions I'll never have an answer for. And there's this constant, lingering fear that those beings no longer hide an unseen corner of the universe, but are closer than ever, and that, if they wanted to, they would erase our existence in a fraction of a second. Thanks for watching. If you like the stories, remember to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any other true disturbing stories. See you next video.